Bantam Doubleday Dell Audio Publishing presents Trinities by Nick Tosches. He stood there like the lesser part of his own shadow. Stood there as he did every night on 2nd Avenue near the bodega at the southwest corner of 115th Street. A vaguely unsettling spectral presence in a fake leather jacket. He was barely 25 years old, but all youth had been drained from him, and he had the sallow, expressionless face of a corpse. Even the sparse, scraggly hairs of his mustache were like those of post-mortem growth. In his left hand he held a torn-open cellophane bag of Rolette's barbecue-flavored fried pork rinds. Raking through it with the fingers of his right hand, he brought its remains to his mouth. He tossed the greasy bag to the pavement, and with his fake leather sleeve wiped the oil and crumbs from his mouth and mustache. He looked abstractedly at the back of the hand he had raised to his face. Mierda. He was turning yellow again. He shook away the thought. No, he told himself, it was just the ugly light from the bodega. He looked up at the moon that rose in the darkening sky and saw that it too cast an ugly light. El jockey es vuelto, he muttered to those who passed. Los toxicómanos, the wretched ones like himself, and the young roving ones that moved in loud gathering packs. He had picked up too soon after rehab this time, he told himself. Tomorrow he would kick. If he chilled out now, he could do it on his own. No Thorazine, no detox, none of that shit. He still had some Trexan. He'd get him some methadone, some Librium. Mañana. He cursed himself, but the curse was silenced and washed away by death's sweet tidal flow within his veins. He scratched through the fake leather at the sclerotic skin of his left arm. El jockey es vuelto. El jockey es vuelto. He had a taker, then another. It would be a good night. Not far from where he stood, two men from Brooklyn sat at a table in the small dining room of a tavern at 1st Avenue and 116th Street. The two men were in their mid-30s. One, whom men knew as Willie Gloves, was overweight, with dark, thinning hair held stiffly in place by a glaze of styling spray. The other, Johnny DiPietro by name, was lean and wiry, with hair brushed back in chestnut-colored waves. The heavy man wore a floral rayon shirt and a gold bracelet, the other a navy blue pullover and a black kid mohair suit. They ate in easy silence, pouring occasionally from a bottle of wine that had been placed between them. Now and then the lean man, who drank more sparingly than the other, turned to look through the window at the shabby Chrysler that was parked outside. Only 2 of the other 7 tables were occupied. Beyond the latticed partition, men sat at the bar in hushed groups or alone in quiet drunkenness. Here, where the ominous Hispanic breezes of East Harlem did not enter, here where the must and gloom of older and more ominous breezes lingered, even the jukebox seemed to whisper. At minimum volume, the crescendos of Jimmy Rosselli's Mala Femina drifted through the room like faint wisps of some angry sorrow. The 2 men from Brooklyn had been coming to this place since they were boys, and to them the old man who ran the place and cooked the food had always seemed old. Now, with the passing of years, he had become more like a ghost than a man, and the joint itself, once bright with color, was now a somber chiaroscuro of brown and faded ochre hues, subtly ever darkening beneath a patina of nicotine and age. No, this was not so much a bar or a restaurant anymore, but a haunted sanctuary, and the old man was its sentinel, guarding something that was no longer there, preserving times and honoring ways that long ago had ceased to be, except as a memory to him and the dwindling few, strangers now in their own streets, who continued to gather there. But there was something about the squid in this joint that brought the 2 men from Brooklyn here again and again. It wasn't the sauce, thick and garlicky and wine-rich and good as it was. No, it was the squid itself, not the bland, white, rubbery stuff that other joints served, but calamaretti, the smallest baby squids. The calamarici must be frischissimi, the old man never tired of explaining in Sicilian. As a boy in Shaka, he had learned to let the little squids die slowly on ice, for the cold, slow death relaxed their flesh and made them tender. He had learned to pull the tentacles from the sacks so that the guts came out in one clean clot. Their flesh was always freshest in the spring, the old man said, and this was the spring. Yes, there was something about the squid in this joint. It was the reason the 2 men from Brooklyn returned here Friday after Friday, year in and year out. And the fact that the old man served squid only on Friday was the sole reason that the sallow-faced figure in the fake leather jacket had been allowed to live out the week. When they finished, the two men walked outside to the shabby Chrysler, and the wiry man got behind the wheel. From the glove compartment, the other removed a Colt Woodsman and a long, fat Gold Star silencer. He rolled down the window and rested his elbow on it. They drove slowly west on 116th Street, then turned south on 2nd Avenue. "There he is," the driver said. The Chrysler came to a casual halt, and the young man in the fake leather jacket spoke softly in English to the one whose arm rested in the window. "The jockey's back." The elbow of the resting arm rose slightly, suddenly, and from beneath it there were three fast, hollow pops of muted, rushing light. They were halfway across the George Washington Bridge before either of the men in the car spoke. "Fucking Spick looked like he was about ready to croak on his own," the gunman said. He lighted a cigarette. "You still got no idea what the fuck that was all about?" The driver shrugged. "Yeah, just some piece of shit selling dope to feed his own Jones. Maybe he got too big for his Reeboks, stuck his Chuchi Fritos where they don't belong. Who the fuck knows?" "Must have been something important, though, or they wouldn't have got us in on it," the other man said. "Nothing we do is important," the driver answered. "By now I got that much figured out." The gunman appeared to weigh the driver's words. You know your uncle's grooming you," he said at last. "Yeah, to trim the weeds on his fucking grave." The driver drew a deep breath and thought of all the nickel and diming he had been through in the last 16 years. He had run numbers and taken action, had handled jukebox routes and video slots. He had been a purse man in 2 precincts, had handled the Teamsters' dirtiest paperwork in 3 different locals. He had turned stolen bonds and guns, booze and cars. He had dispatched leg breakers, overseen gambling operations, dealt everything from counterfeit 50s to swag mass cards. He had seen the inner beast of this world laid out before him in gross vivisection. And still there had been no passage from the realm of nickels and dimes, no green light, not from his uncle, not from anyone. Those who were arriving to mourn moved aside, and some lowered their heads, as old Giuseppe Di Pietro, his left hand firm on his cane, laboriously descended the steps of the Scarpacci funeral home. His legs were weak with pain, but his countenance did not betray it. Beneath the cocked brim of his Milano fedora, he stared straight ahead through the thick glass of his horn-rimmed bifocals, as if 86th Street, and indeed all of Brooklyn, were not there. At Giuseppe's left was Louis Bones, a man of 60 years in Ray-Ban sunglasses. He knew not to brace the older man's arm with his hand or to assist him in any way, for this was how Giuseppe Di Pietro wanted it. A man in a shadow-striped suit and dark glasses opened the curbside rear door of the black Mercedes 600 SEL, and old Giuseppe, with some difficulty, settled into the soft leather seat. The man in the shadow-striped suit then walked around to open the other rear door for Louis Bones. "Accomari secca," the old man intoned as the car began to move. The dry mistress. He said these words whenever death was near. He seemed to reserve an august dignity for them alone. As if observing some tacit ritual protocol, Louis Bones waited until Giuseppe pronounced these words before he himself spoke. "Did you hear the fucking undertaker? 'I'll see you soon,' he says to me. 'Fuck you,' I told him. 'I'll see you.'" "He's right, that Beckamort. You'll have us all soon enough." The old man stared through the window as they made their way west through Brooklyn. "Brooklyn," he whispered to himself. A curse, an exorcism, an obscure and tenebrous judgment. "Look at me. I've seen better carcasses hanging from hooks. I'll be 81 next Christmas. That piece of shit in that box there was only 75. Every morning I wake up, I thank God." "You'll outlive us all, Joe." "Yeah, that's what I used to tell that piece of shit in that box." The old man put a gnarled little de Nobili cigar between his teeth, and Louis Bones held the flame of a gold lighter to it. They crossed the bridge to Staten Island. They rode in silence. Then old Giuseppe said it again. "Accomari secca." The Mercedes pulled into the driveway of Louis Bones' house on Castleton Avenue.
"There's coffee in the kitchen," Louis told the man in the shadow-striped suit. "Tell my wife we're out back. Have her put the game on for you."
The old man followed Louis to a flagstone patio that looked out onto a broad lawn, and they sat on cushioned wrought-iron chairs. Louis's wife appeared, a fat woman in a brightly colored house dress, her hair dyed platinum. She bent and kissed the old man on the cheek. "Did you see the garden, Joe?" Old Giuseppe looked in the direction of the tomato plants.
"Nice," he said.
"Oh, well, let me get the demitasse," she said, and the men sat silently until she returned with a silver tray. When a car pulled into the drive, Louis said,
"Here's Tonio."
He lighted a cigarette.
"Bring another demitasse," he told his wife, "and a bottle of, what's that shit he drinks?"
"He don't drink no shit no more. He quit."
The voice was that of Antonio Pacienza, older even than old Giuseppe, and more bent. He put his arms around the fat lady and returned her kiss in kind.
"Why don't you dump this bum here? You and me will go to Niagara Falls."
The eyes of his perpetual scowl brightened somewhat as he made his customary little joke.
"We'll let Louis carry the bags," she giggled.
It was the same playful response she had made for years. She withdrew and returned with a third coffee, and this time, when she went back into the house, she closed the sliding glass door behind her.
"So,"
old Tonio said. The obsidian coldness had returned to his eyes.
"Here we are."
Old Giuseppe snorted.
"They might as well put our names along with his on that tombstone. They gave us our last rites when we gave them our blessing."
"Yeah, it's our own fault," Louis Bones said. "All them punks with the fancy talk, all them college Joes with the computers, and the spreadsheets, and the cash conversion cycles. They give us this line of shit and we bought it. It makes me laugh. Leveraged buyouts. We got more leverage out of a fucking lead pipe."
"And now," Giuseppe said, "they've lost what we gave them. The spics, the niggers. They've run our own kind off our own streets. Look at this shit up in Harlem. They go to the spics for the bubonia now, just like with the cocaine. My own nephew, my brother's son, he had to go up there. And for what? For nothing. They step on a cockroach and nothing changes. Kids like him, my nephew, they're lost. There's nothing for them. These punks we gave our world to, they're wheeling and dealing and playing big shot. And this other scum is laughing, taking what once belonged to us."
"It still belongs to us," old Tonio said.
"No, it belongs to who seizes it. It belongs to who holds it."
His words were spoken as much to the shadows as to the other men. Like Tonio, he too felt their obscure beguilement. For a moment there were the mingled imagined scents of lemon blossom and the sea, the remembrance of an ancient Trinity, of the blood's mysteries darkening a young boy's flowering senses with the slow, fatal dance of Eros and death.
"And those we gave it to are weak," said Louis Bones. "All greed and no coglione."
"We are different," Giuseppe said, "and there are few of us left. We are true Sicilians. Louis, you were born in this country, but your blood is Sicilian. And we still have the loyalty of those who understand the true blood, men who yet possess the strength of youth that we have lost."
Tonio mentioned names. Louis Bones mentioned others.
"And that is an alloy more powerful than any other, the wisdom of age and the strength of youth."
Giuseppe paused and drank the last of his coffee, which was bitter and cold.
"While there is still time, and before it is lost forever, we can take back all that once was ours, and more."
Tonio leaned back and spoke with slow deliberation.
"Giuseppe, my friend, your words are like a beautiful cloud in the sky."
He became less placid.
"Ma unia sustanza."
Giuseppe brought a crooked forefinger lightly to his temple.
"Eccolo," he said. "Here," he said. "The substance is here."
His nostrils flared.
"Ecco è nella potenzia che sta tra noi e il nostro calcagno, nelle colline e di sui schiavazzi della coscia siciliane."
Louis Bones, whose Italian and Sicilian were good, but whose baccaggio, his language of evil as they defined it in Sicily, was poor, let the words unravel in his mind. "Here," the old man had said, "here, and in the power that lies between us and our friend in the hills and his,
Schiavazza della coscia siciliana.
There was no unraveling of that phrase into English, nor any need to. It lay coiled, chill and venomous, as the old man had invoked it. Tonio and Louis Bones stared at Giuseppe and were silent, and when old Giuseppe spoke again, all he said was,
Avemo a fare come San Giorgio. Avemo a fare morire un dragù.
He said the words slowly and pronounced them finely, and even Louis Bones' grasp of them was fast and clear. We must be like St. George, the old man had said. We must slay the dragon. The teacup, which bore the Qing dynasty mark of the Emperor Dao Quang, was perhaps a century older than Chen Fang himself. The white porcelain surfaces of its bowl and lid were decorated on the outside with scenes of romance, and on the inside with scenes of lust. Standing at his kitchen sink in baggy gray trousers and a shabby undershirt, Fang ran warm water into the teacup, then brought it from the kitchen, which was bright with sunlight and loud with the sounds that rose from Baxter Street below, to the bedroom, which was quieter and dim with the shadows of late afternoon. Everything else he needed was already there. He sat and removed the plastic cap from the needle of a syringe and dipped the point into the cup. The 5 glassine bags, sealed with the printed stamp of the racing horseman, had already been opened, and the white powder from them lay brimming in the hollow of a bent silver spoon. He released the warm water from the syringe to mix with the white powder, then raised the spoon to the flame of a devotional candle and held the spoon steady. When he was done, he drew the liquor back through the needle and wound a length of tubing around his arm. Shu-wu, nothingness. Fang-fu, ecstasy. Shu-wu and Guangshi, as they said in the tongue of his native Shanghai. In his years in Chinatown, Chen Fang had come to know Mandarin and Cantonese, but even now, as an old man, he still thought and dreamed in the Shanghainese of his youth. The Malaysian girl in his bed, she was perhaps 12 or 13 years old, drew back the covers for him as he removed his trousers. Her expression belied what she saw, a skeletal apparition with skin like translucent parchment and glassy yellow eyes deep in ashen sockets. He lay down beside her. He felt her lips and tongue lightly upon him, and he drifted. He saw himself then, a small boy, in Shanghai, on an evening in May of 1929, an attendant at one of Tu Yue Sheng's properties, a place where ledgers were kept, where the revenues of the endless vast ladings of opium and heroin that passed through the Green Gang's waterfront hongs were registered and tallied en route to the Bank of China, Tu's own Qingwai Bank in the French Concession, to the new Central Bank of China, to the recesses of the Mokanshan Monastery in the Wuling Mountains, to other black accounts around the world. It was here that Chen's grandfather waited upon the men whose dominion encompassed the 1,000 miles of the Yangtze Valley, the most powerful of them all being Big-Eared Tu, the man who 20 years before had brought the Red Gang and the Blue Gang into the fold of his now almighty Green Gang. It was here that young Chen had been brought to bow before Big-Eared Tu's acolyte and partner Chiang Kai-shek soon after Generalissimo Chiang's Kuomintang government in Nanjing had become the government of all of China. And it was on this particular evening, spying on Big Tu, that Chen had watched the drug lord entertain a Jesuit missionary who had come peddling a valuable ancient book. The fat man had taken the priest out into the garden. In the darkening twilight beyond the door, the priest glimpsed a luxuriance of broad green leaves and salver-shaped blossoms, lush blue vines and wild mulberry, and nameless orange-petaled things that drank the light of the moon. For a moment he must have been as a child, lost in a fairy-tale garden of sunless enchantment. In that moment, the fat man raised a large black revolver to the back of his head and blew him forward to hell. Chen Fang emerged from his haunted dream with a start. He became conscious of the warm, willowy breath and slender body beside him, and he opened his eyes to the little girl's drowsing face. Johnny DiPietro drew a breath of idle disgust, threw the TV guide down beside him on the couch, and, exhaling that same dismal breath, picked up that morning's Newsday. Walking past with her spray pal in hand, Diane DiPietro glanced warily toward him, then continued on her way to the spider plant that hung by the window. The dead spick had not made the paper. Good. He tossed the folded Newsday onto the TV guide and looked across the room at his wife's ass. He had not fucked her in over a year. "Anything good on tonight?" she asked. The blowjobs had been the first to go, then the other shit. A couple of years ago she had gotten some sort of throat infection and attributed it to his semen, which she screamed, had been contaminated by the hygienic horrors of his drunkenness and filthy infidelities. Then one night when he was loaded, he had smacked her, and that was it. The months had passed. He had quit drinking, except for a glass of wine now and then behind her back, and he had sweetened up to her, but by the time she had allowed herself to get close to him again, it was too late. Too much cold, unsettling distance lay between them, and now that cold, unsettling distance was the tie that bound as well as estranged them. Their marriage, as he had known it, was over. She spoke of wanting to work things out, of resolving things, of getting back to where they once had been, the babble of dissolution. He knew there was no getting back, but inertia kept him from moving forward, and something in him found comfort in the dead stillness beneath the unsettling surface of estrangement. It was always Willie's finger, never his own, that pulled the trigger, that served as the intercessor between himself and the truth of himself. In the estrangement that lay between his wife and him, he found that same tenuous reprieve from the ravings and cravings of will and soul. It was the only kind of peace he had ever known, and he was beginning to hate it. "No," he answered. "Nothing on television." "How was the meeting last night?" Which meeting had he told her he was going to? AA? The Union? "Same old shit," he said. That covered it. "Give it a chance. You're doing so good." AA. He actually did go to AA once in a while, though he never told her the real reason why. He made out like a bandit there. All those lonely broads, all that desperate, dysfunctional pussy wandering lost in the stairwell of those 12 steps. The telephone rang. He answered it with a tone of indifference, but then he leaned forward and straightened his back. "Uncle Joe," he said. Rather than satisfy Diane's curiosity, this only increased it. The old man both repelled and beguiled her. She was naive, but she was not stupid. She believed there was a legitimate aspect to Johnny's position in the sanitation union, that he did more than pick up an inflated paycheck and serve occasionally as a middleman in straightening out territorial disputes. But she was also aware of the nature of the forces that Johnny represented in the union. In her mind, however, the legitimacy of his occupation, as perceived by her, distinguished him somewhat from those forces to which he was beholden. Unions were considered the salvation of the working man, the backbone of America. Her husband's place, as she believed it to be, a relatively innocent, relatively respectable position in the ingrained American scheme of necessary evil, was one that could be comfortably rationalized. The figure of his uncle, however, and the nature of his works and days, afforded no such comfort, no such explaining away. The old man had set up Johnny in the Union, as he had set up his own kid brother, Johnny's father, before him. Johnny's father had ended up drinking his way out of life, leaving behind nothing but the ambivalent grief of a brother and a son, and the gambling debts that had enslaved him and betrayed them. To her, the worst aspect of Johnny's place in that rationalized scheme of necessary evil was that it lay in the suffocating shadows of his own father's doom, and she could not help but wonder what Johnny might have become were it not for his uncle, whom she viewed as more of a curse than a blessing. And yet there was that beguilement. Uncle Joe was like an air of dark romance, carrying with him the intrigue of mysterious powers. But it was the idea of him, not the reality of his presence, that her imagination savored. Lately he had all but evanesced from her consciousness, and from their lives. Now here he was in a wholly new and sudden emanation. He had never called before. Never. The old man asked Johnny what he was doing on Monday. "Meet me at the club on Monday," the old man said. 11 o'clock. I want to talk to you." "Is something wrong?" "No, I just want to talk to you, see how you feel about something. After that, if things work out, we'll take a ride down to see somebody. One way or the other, we'll have a nice lunch." Johnny returned the receiver gently to its cradle. "What's up?" Diane asked. "Nothing." She repeated the word to herself, a weary, inaudible mutter that barely stirred her lips. Her cold look grazed him as she retreated to the kitchen. A cabinet door slammed, then another, then the refrigerator. A pot came down heavy on the stove. Soon Johnny could smell the fragrance of the garlic and onions, the parsley, basil, and oregano sizzling in the oil. "Do you want me to get a video?" she called from the kitchen. There was a weary serenity now in her voice. "Sure." "What are you in the mood for?" A ray of optimism flickered in her voice. "Tits, blood, monsters, the usual shit." Johnny got off the B train at Grand Street, walked a few short blocks to Mulberry Street, then south a block to Hester. It was a beautiful morning, and 3 men were sitting outside on the vinyl chairs they had brought out of the club into the warm spring sun. Johnny recognized his uncle's black Mercedes parked down the street in one of the spaces that men such as these kept reserved for men such as he.
"You go all the way to fucking Spring Street to get a fucking haircut?"
one of them was saying to another.
"What fucking all the way? A few fucking blocks. A nice walk,"
the other said.
"You're fucking nuts. You got fucking Sal right here around the corner, and you go all the way to fuck up there."
The 3 men looked at Johnny inquisitively as he passed through the open door from sunlight into gloom. 2 figures sat at a small table drinking coffee. Johnny knew one of them, Frankie Blue, his uncle's chauffeur and guardia del corpo. He was a few years older than Johnny, and he held out his hand to grasp Johnny's own. Uncle Joe sat alone at a table by the wall, and Johnny patted his back affectionately, then sat across from him.
"You still taking it easy with the booze?"
the old man asked. Johnny nodded resolutely, and Uncle Joe nodded resolutely in turn. The subtleties of the old man's stony expression were indiscernible to most, but his nephew read them well and fluently, and he could see in the cast of his face not only approval, but understanding and admiration as well.
"Dewey,"
Giuseppe called to the man behind the bar, and the barman soon brought 2 cups of steaming espresso. "How you feeling?" Johnny asked.
"I can't complain," the old man said. "Some days good, some days bad. It comes and it goes. There's a lot of guys my age would want to trade what they got for what I got."
"So," Johnny said, "what's on your mind?"
"I want to ask you something," the old man said in a low voice. He sipped at his coffee. "How do you feel about dope?"
"What do you mean?"
"What I mean is, how do you feel about dope? Do you think dope is a good thing? Do you think dope is a bad thing? How do you feel about dope?"
"I think dope is a bad thing, a plague. I think it's turned this goddamn city into a fucking jungle. I think dope dealers are worse shit than lawyers. I think together they're doing a good fucking job of ruining the world."
"So you would never get involved in it?"
2 men entered the club, one of them speaking loudly, and Johnny saw Frankie Blue say something to them. He gestured with a tilt of his head toward the back of the room where Johnny and his uncle sat, and the men nodded with vague, tacit comprehension and left.
"It's like this," Johnny said. "I see some filthy fucking illegal alien piece of shit with 2 or 3 pounds of ratty fucking dreadlocks stuffed into a high-rise pea-cap the size of a fucking duffel bag, and he's selling dope, and the fucking cops are doing fucking nothing. As long as it's right there, here to stay, out in the open, with none of these fucking half-a-riccione cops doing a fucking thing. As long as they want this shit in the streets, well, then fuck 'em. Yeah, I'd get involved. On aesthetic grounds alone," he smirked. "I mean, I'd rather see me than a fucking eyesore Rasta strolling down the street. I'd cut a far more striking figure." The old man was grinning, actually grinning. Then he raised his cup to his lips, and when he lowered it, his face had once again turned to stone. "I'm not talking about the street. I'm talking about the world. As goes the street, so goes the world. Those are your words. And they're still true. The world will follow the streets to hell. It's happening now. And no one man, no army of men will turn the tide. The question I'm asking you is this. Does your morality, call it whatever you want, your code, your principles, your sense of right and wrong, that scrap of something in your heart or soul that separates you from the beasts, does it allow you to make money from the business of hell?" He raised his right hand slowly, upturned and grasping in a gesture that took the place of words. "When I was a young boy, when I first came to this country, back before your father was born, I'll never forget, I saw a horse go mad on Cornelia Street, a big black horse with big wild eyes, foaming at the mouth and galloping crazy through the street. Finally, it crashed through a big glass storefront, blood and glass everywhere. The horse was down and bloody and whinnying and kicking, and somebody put a revolver to its head and put it out of its misery. That dead horse stayed there for days, all bloated and stiff. Finally, the DSC came to try to haul it away, and one of them took a crowbar and ripped open the belly. Pus gushed out like a torrent. You could smell the stink a block away. I think of this world now as a black horse running wild to hell, its body filled with disease. I think of seizing that horse for one terrible moment as it gallops toward those flames, riding it and looting all that is in the path of its destruction, then jumping off before being thrown and broken. Just that one moment, that one terrible moment. Then I'll watch that doomed horse continue on its way. Nothing will have changed. The world will be no better and no worse. The only difference will be, as you say, estetica.
He pronounced the word clearly and finely. When speaking to his nephew, he eschewed Sicilian for Italian. Johnny's Italian was faltering and fair at best, but his understanding of Sicilian was for the most part confined to its crudest and commonest elements.